Hey everyone, and welcome back. Have you ever wished you could have like way more control over what AI writes? I mean, really get down into the specifics, like telling it to write a positive review for a restaurant, but making sure that it uses specific grammar rules or even like fits a certain writing style.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That level of control would be a game changer for so many applications.
Right. Well, get this. Researchers are making some serious headway on that front, and we're going to dive deep into one of the most exciting developments. It's called Diffusion-LM.
It's true, this is a super interesting area. You see, traditional language models, they're really good at generating text, but getting them to follow specific instructions, especially really complex ones, that's been a real challenge. It's kind of like trying to herd cats.
Huh? I can see that. You can kind of point them in the right direction, but they're going to do their own thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like we need a better way to herd these language models. So that's where Diffusion-LM comes in, right? But what makes it so special? The research paper mentions it's inspired by something totally unexpected, image and audio generation.
You're picking up on the key point there. Diffusion-LM, it takes inspiration from diffusion models, which they've been really revolutionary in how we generate images and audio, and it's a pretty wild concept. So instead of building text word by word like traditional models do, Diffusion-LM starts with pure noise and then gradually refines it into meaningful text.
Hold on, starting with noise. So it's like taking, I don't know, a jumbled mess of letters and somehow turning it into like a well-crafted sentence. I'm having trouble picturing that.
It is a unique approach. Think of it like imagine you have a messy chalkboard and it's covered in just random scribbles, right? Diffusion LM, it uses a series of steps, kind of like an artist meticulously erasing and redrawing, to slowly transform those scribbles into clear, legible words.
Okay, I think that analogy helps. But how does it actually control what the model writes? The paper mentions latent variables being key here, but I'm not totally clear on what those are.
Good question. Think of latent variables as kind of like hidden settings or controls behind the scenes. Each variable influences some aspect of the generated text, like the grammar or the style or even the sentiment. And the really cool part is that these variables are continuous, meaning they can be adjusted with a lot of precision.
So it's like having a mixing board with a ton of knobs, and each knob controls a different element of the text.
Exactly. Just like a sound engineer adjusts those knobs to get a specific sound, Diffusion LM uses something called gradient-based control to adjust these latent variables and guide the generation process.
Gradient-based control. That sounds complicated. Is that where all the math comes in?
Well, there's definitely some math involved, but the basic idea is pretty intuitive, I promise. Imagine you have a separate program that can tell you how well a piece of text matches a specific instruction, like if it's grammatically correct or if it has a positive sentiment, and we can use that program's feedback, which comes in a form of gradients, to guide Diffusion LM toward generating text that satisfies the instructions.
So it's like having a coach on the sideline saying, hey, move this variable a bit to the left and you'll get a more positive sentence.
You got it. And the amazing thing is that Diffusion LM can juggle multiple instructions at the same time. So it can balance things like grammatical correctness and sentiment and even stylistic choices to create text that hits all the criteria.
That's incredible. This sounds like Diffusion-LM has the potential to be a real game changer for so many applications. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's dive into the specifics. The research paper highlights 6 key tasks that Diffusion-LM excels at. Can you walk us through those?
Absolutely. They tested Diffusion LM on some challenging tasks. First up is controlling semantic content. So that's making sure the generated text includes certain details or topics.
So if I wanted to generate a product description, for example, that highlights specific features, Diffusion-LM could handle that.
Exactly, and it doesn't stop there. They also tested controlling parts of speech, which means you can tell it to generate text with a specific sequence of nouns, verbs, adjectives, all that good stuff.
Wow, that's getting down into the nuts and bolts of language.
It is, and maybe even more impressive is that it can control syntactic structures. Things like parse trees and spans, which basically means you can dictate the whole grammatical structure of a sentence.
That's incredible. It sounds like this could be so helpful for writers who want to experiment with different sentence structures or create text that follows specific guidelines.
Exactly, and we're just getting started. They also tested controlling text length, which is useful for things like generating concise summaries or fitting text into character limits.
Practical and powerful. I like it. What else did they look at?
They also explored sentence infilling, which is kind of like filling in the blanks in a sentence while keeping it coherent and grammatically accurate.
That sounds like a fun party trick.
It's definitely impressive, and it highlights a key advantage of Diffusion LM. Because it's non-autoregressive, meaning it doesn't generate text in a strict left to right order, it can handle tasks like infilling much better than traditional models.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But the big question is, how does Diffusion-LM actually stack up against the competition?
Well, the researchers compared it to a few other existing methods, including some of the most advanced techniques out there, and the results are really remarkable. So get this, it significantly outperformed previous like plug and play methods, things like PPLM and FUDGE on these complex control tasks. And get this, it even matched or surpassed the performance of fine-tuned models in some cases.
Wait, fine-tuned models, those are like the gold standard, right? The ones that are trained specifically for a certain task. You're telling me Diffusion-LM, this model that starts with noise and uses all this fancy gradient stuff, can beat the specialists.
That's right, and that's what makes this so groundbreaking. It suggests that we might not actually need to train separate models for every single task. Diffusion-LM, it offers this more general, adaptable approach to controllable text generation.
That's a huge deal. So we're not just talking about a cool research project here. This has like real implications. I can imagine marketers using this to create perfectly tailored ad copy or writers getting help crafting stories with specific styles and structures.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right on the money. This really opens up so many possibilities. Imagine generating personalized educational content, or writing more nuanced dialogue for chatbots, or even helping people with language impairments to communicate better.
Okay, before we get too carried away with all the possibilities, let's acknowledge that no technology is perfect. What are some of the limitations of Diffusion-LM? The paper mentions a few, right?
You're right to bring that up. While Diffusion-LM shows a lot of promise, it does have some drawbacks. For example, it tends to have higher perplexity compared to some traditional models.
Perplexity. Now, remind me what that means again?
Sure. Essentially, it means that Diffusion-LM might not be as good at predicting the next word in a sequence, compared to some other models. So it might be a little less fluent, maybe a bit less predictable in certain situations.
Got it. So it might not be winning any poetry slams anytime soon.
Maybe not, haha. And another limitation is that the decoding process, that's how the model turns those latent variables into actual text, that can be a bit slower because of all the steps involved with refining that initial noise. Plus, training these models, it can take a while to converge, which can be a bottleneck for researchers.
So there are definitely some kinks to iron out before this becomes like the go-to solution for everything. But the potential is definitely there. Now, I'm curious about those sentence infilling results. You mentioned that Diffusion-LM's non-autoregressive nature gives it an edge there. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. So, what's fascinating about sentence infilling is that it really highlights how Diffusion-LM breaks free from those limitations of traditional models that generate text, step by step, like left to right.
So it's like if you're trying to complete a sentence, but you don't actually know the ending, traditional models would struggle with that because they can't look ahead to see what needs to fit in that gap.
That's a really good way to put it. But Diffusion-LM can consider that whole sentence, like both the beginning and the end, all at once. It's like it has this bird's eye view of the whole thing.
That makes sense.
And this allows it to generate infills that aren't just grammatically correct, but they also fit perfectly with that surrounding context.
Yeah, and the results speak for themselves, right? Outperforming those specialized infilling methods and going toe-to-toe with a model specifically trained for that, that's pretty impressive.
It really is, and it shows off another one of Diffusion-LM's strengths of versatility. It's not a one-trick pony. This one model can handle a bunch of different control challenges, even ones that used to require these highly specialized models.
Okay, I have to ask, with all this talk about AI taking control of writing, what does this actually mean for human writers? Are we all about to be replaced by robots?
I get why people ask that. It's important to remember that Diffusion-LM is a tool, not a replacement. It's like this supercharged writing assistant. It can help you get over writer's block, explore different styles, and even spark new ideas.
So it's not about AI versus humans. It's more like AI working with humans to boost creativity.
Exactly. Human writers, they bring their unique perspectives and experiences and emotions to the table, things that AI just can't replicate. Diffusion-LM can provide the building blocks, but it's still up to us humans to put them together into a story that people actually want to read.
Okay, that's a much more reassuring perspective. Writers can breathe a sigh of relief, at least for now. But looking ahead, where do you see this technology going in the future? Like, what other aspects of text might we be able to control down the line?
That's where things get exciting. Imagine being able to control not just the syntax and the semantics, but things like the tone, the rhythm, maybe even the emotional impact of the text.
Whoa, the emotional impact. You're saying we might be able to tell an AI to write a sentence that makes people feel hopeful, and it could actually do it.
It sounds like science fiction, but I wouldn't rule it out. As we understand more and more about language and emotions, and as these AI models get even more sophisticated, I think controlling those subtle elements might actually become possible.
Just imagine the possibilities. That could be huge for persuasive speeches, or writing therapeutic narratives, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. But it's important too that we're developing and using this tech responsibly, right? The ability to shape emotions with text, that's a lot of responsibility.
It really is. It's like any powerful tool. It can be used for good or for bad. It all comes down to human choices.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We need to be having these open and honest conversations about the ethics involved and make sure that we're using this tech to benefit all of humanity.
I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive. I want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your expertise on this fascinating topic.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of Diffusion-LM and the future of controllable text generation. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.